African countries generate trillions of dollars in value, yet over 90% of the profits exit the continent, never returning. Let's break this down with absolute clarity, industry by industry, and then expose the structural mechanisms that enforce this continuous wealth hemorrhage. The reality is that African product produces, but others profit. Africa controls vast reserves of 30 to 40% of the world's natural resources, 60 to 70% of global cobalt, the DR Congo, and over 12% of the global oil reserves, 90% of the world's, or 80% rather, of the world's coltan for smartphones, and nearly 90% of platinum, chromium, and manganese. And yet, over 90% of the revenue is from the extraction of these mineral resources leaves the continent. Let's look at the DR Congo, for example. The DR Congo produces over 70% of the world's cobalt, an estimated $24 trillion in untapped mineral wealth, yet remains one of the poorest countries on earth. Why? Because mines are owned by foreign multinationals, Glencore in Switzerland, China. Only 3 to 5% of total cobalt profits stay in the Congo. Locals get low-wage jobs and zero equity. Environmental destruction is left behind, and billions of dollars are wired out annually to Switzerland, Luxembourg, and Hong Kong. Let's take a look at Nigeria. Nigeria generates over 35 to 40 billion dollars a year in oil exports. And yet over 75% of the revenue is controlled by Shell, Total Energies, Chevron, Eni, and ExxonMobil. Refining is done abroad, so Nigeria must buy back its own oil as fuel. Nigeria earns less per barrel than companies pumping it. Let's take a look at agricultural extraction, cash crops, and land grabs. Africa is a net food exporter, yet millions go hungry. Cocoa, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire produce over 60% of the world's supply, but make up only 5 to 6% of the world's cocoa revenue. The real profits go to Nestle, Mars, Hershey, Ferrero. These are all European US companies. Let's take a look at land grabs. Over 100 million hectares of Africa land has been sold or leased to foreign entities. China, Gulf states, US firms, and European agribusiness. Africans get zero share of export profits, just labor, jobs, or displacement. It's a plantation economy 2.0. You work the soil, they own the crop. Let's take a look at the financial extraction, debt, aid, and banking. Africa pays 30 to 40 billion dollars a year in debt servicing to the IMF, the World Bank, China, and the Paris Club. Much of the debt is colonial era rollover debt. For instance, Haiti paying France for its own freedom until the 1940s. Aid is a lie. Africa receives $30 billion in aid, but loses over $200 billion in capital flight, tax evasion, debt payments, and profit repatriation. Let's take a look at banking. Most African nations bank externally. London, Paris, New York. Even locally store wealth abroad, reinforcing the drain. Africa is not poor, it is robbed every year systematically. Let's take a look at the corporate structure extraction, ownership, repatriation, intellectual property theft. Over 80% of African extractive industries are foreign owned. Local governments get royalties, not revenue shares. Profits are repatriated to holding companies in Switzerland, Cayman Islands, Netherlands, the UK, and Singapore. No tech intellectual property is developed locally. African raw materials goes to Western factories. And the Western factories produce finished products that are then sold back to Africa at a 10 times markup. Africa supplies the world and buys back its own wealth with interest rather. Let's take a look at the ports, logistics and infrastructure. Ports, railroads, airports are all foreign design, foreign finance, and forward operated. As a result, African goods are exported on foreign ships insured in European firms and traded in London and Shanghai. Africa doesn't control pricing, distribution, global trade negotiations, insurance, and shipping lanes. The pipeline is global, and Africa doesn't own a single valve. Let's take a look at intellectual property and cultural theft. African textiles, patterns, music, spirituality, language, and even dance trends are being monetized globally by global fashion houses, platforms, and labels. African creators get zero royalties or licensing rights. Let's take a look at the Western tech. Google, Meta, and even OpenAI use African languages, voices, faces, and internet data to train its AI without compensation. Cultural output equals monetized externally and credited elsewhere. The summary is Africa is a source. The global north profits. The global south is in debt and dependency. For every $1 that Africa receives, 4 to 10 of dollars leaves the continent via cultural profit repatriation, trade imbalance, illicit capital flights, debt payments, and elite capital storage abroad. Africa makes the money, but others own the pipeline, the pricing, the processing, the shipping, and the story. Africa isn't developing. It's being bled to keep others developed.